Hey, Steve, thanks for taking my call. As you can tell, I'm in the airport now, but before I headed out, I heard of a new regulation coming into effect from the Department of Labor. You're the labor pro, and I wanted to give you a call on that because they understand it can have some impact on trucking.
Yeah, absolutely, Doug. So the USDOL, U.S. Department of Labor, issued a new final rule that goes into effect on March 11th. It involves a new six-factor test for determining whether a worker may be classified as an independent contractor. In many respects, it's a return to the pre-Trump administration 2021 rule change that really focused on two key factors. So rather than just those two key factors that have been sort of the central inquiries for independent contractors for the last 3 years or thereabouts, the new test is a six-factor test in which every factor is to be weighed equally. So under the new rule, the factors are the nature and degree of control by the business over the work being performed, the worker's opportunity for profit and loss, the type of investments made by the worker and potential employer, the degree of permanence of the working relationship, the extent to which the work performed is an integral part of the potential employer's business, and whether the worker used specialized skills to perform the work and whether those skills contribute to a business-like initiative. So, Doug, there are several of these factors that are particularly relevant to the trucking industry. I should begin by pointing out that the American Trucking Association has released a statement shortly after this final rule change was announced at the beginning of the month. The ATA is extremely critical of the rule change, and for good reason. In many respects, it's going to make it more difficult to categorize your workers in the trucking industry as independent contractors. And that's true not only within the trucking industry, but across the board. The rule change is an employee-friendly rule change. Now, I would also be remiss if I didn't point out that this rule change is a regulation by the U.S. Department of Labor. It is not a law. So the courts will ultimately determine what test to apply when evaluating, whether a trucker may be an independent contractor or an employee. But the courts typically find that these types of regulations, particularly by the U.S. Department of Labor, are especially persuasive. And so it's something that the trucking industry and again, industries across the board need to be aware of and try to comply with as best they can. But specific to trucking, the question of investments made by potential employees, that's one of the six factors. And what you see typically or sometimes within the trucking industry is whether there's an employer-sponsored lease for a truck. The new rule says that if there is an employer-sponsored lease for a truck, that is not necessarily the type of investment that supports classification as an independent contractor. But where the driver has a choice as to whether to accept the lease or not, whether the driver can independently finance, whether the lease might ultimately result in the driver owning that truck, these are indicia that can support the driver remaining an independent contractor. So the circumstances of the employer-sponsored lease for a truck are important in this analysis. The second big factor of the six-factor test that really, I think, applies to the trucking industry is the question of specialized skills. And the new rule that was published in comments to the rule, the USDOL says having a CDL is not necessarily indicative of specialized skills. But again, if they're using that CDL in a business-like initiative, that is the key, because if the driver can potentially be classified as an independent contractor. And the factors that go into that: do the drivers have control over scheduling, over pickups, the routes they're going to take, etc.? That all indicates that they're applying the use of their CDL in a business-like initiative. So there's a lot going on, Doug, in these 6 factors. But like I said, those are a couple that are particularly relevant to the trucking industry. And, certainly the labor and employment group here at our firm stands ready to assist any of the trucking companies out there.
It sounds great. Greatly appreciate it. And I knew in a short form you could bring me up to date on that. Greatly appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thanks, Doug.